My heart sank as my mother-in-law brandished a knife, her words slicing through me like blades. You not only demand our son to handle household chores and childcare, but now you're also after our finances. Get out of this house, you lazy freeloader. You barely bring in $700. A chill ran down my spine as I stood there, sweat beading on my forehead. Despite pouring all my energy into managing the household and looking after the children in lieu of my unemployed husband, I found myself confronted with accusations and hostility. It was a crushing moment, a culmination of frustration and despair. I knew then that I had reached my breaking point. I left the chores unfinished, scooped up my child, and made a beeline for my parents' house. I'm Emily, 23 years old, residing with my husband, our little one, and my mother-in-law. My mind wandered back to the beginning. Richard, my high school's golden boy, a star on the soccer field and beloved student president. His return to our small town after landing a job was met with adoration from everyone. When he approached me, I was taken aback. After a few dates, we dove into a serious relationship. Even now, as adults, he remained my handsome, envy-inducing boyfriend. After graduating from vocational school, I discovered I was pregnant. It wasn't the typical order of events, but I held onto the belief that I could still carve out a happy life with my child and Richard. Our home echoed with discussions about our future post-marriage. How about moving into my parents' place after we tie the knot? Richard suggested. Why? I envisioned just the three of us, our child included, I countered. But won't that be expensive? If we stay with my parents, money won't be a constant worry. With both of us working, we could afford our own place, couldn't we? Well, about that, my income this month is pretty dismal. How bad? I pressed. Less than $1,000. What? How is that possible? I thought you were working at an IT company. I quit. Now I'm trying my luck at the casino and picking up part-time gigs. The casino? Why would you do that? My disbelief hung heavy in the air. It turned out he had quit his job after only a month. If you're okay handling all the expenses, I'm fine with fitting an apartment, he stated matter-of-factly. His detached demeanor left me feeling uneasy, questioning if I was the only one truly invested in our fresh start together. Sensing my apprehension, he grasped both of my hands firmly. It's just temporary until I secure another job. I'll make you happy, Emily. I'll take care of all the household chores and child rearing until then. Trusting in his assurances, we exchanged vows. Our journey together began in his parents' home. Following a safe delivery, I pledged to give my all for my son. Both Richard and my mother-in-law appeared content, and I eagerly anticipated our shared journey ahead. However, even after our son was born, Richard neglected his responsibilities, opting to spend his days at the casino. After the casino again, what about helping with the household chores and caring for our child? I confronted him about his broken promise. Don't you dare tell me what to do. Richard's sudden outburst caught me off guard. Perplexed by the sudden tension, my mother-in-law intervened, drawn by the commotion. What's all this noise? It's just that I'm overwhelmed with work, and she's asking for assistance with chores and childcare, I explained. What? That's a wife's duty. My mother-in-law's response left me stunned. Richard hadn't informed his mother about quitting his job. Instead, he painted me as an unreasonable wife, burdening him with household chores and childcare. Initially, my mother-in-law, who had been kind, grew to resent me after buying into Richard's narrative. Despite his sporadic part-time work and frequent trips to the casino, where he barely earned $700, Richard persisted in his fruitless attempts to double his earnings, often losing everything. I shouldered the majority of our living expenses, which made our lives increasingly challenging. Unable to bear the financial strain any longer, I reluctantly re-entered the workforce. After dropping off our son at the childcare center, I was fortunate to secure a job as a dental hygienist rather swiftly. However, upon returning home each evening, I was greeted by my mother-in-law's tirades. What time do you call this? This isn't playtime. You're a parent, yet all you do is gallivant around. Get dinner started now. In her frustration, she slammed the newspaper she was holding onto the floor, a common occurrence whenever she was upset. My mother-in-law had a volatile temperament, her mood shifting at the slightest provocation. The unpredictability of her reactions left me feeling powerless. Juggling the responsibilities of caring for my young son, working and managing household chores left me mentally and physically drained. Unable to endure it any longer, I resolved to confront Richard once again. I intercepted him early in the morning before he headed out to the casino. Listen, I've reached my breaking point. Can't you lend a hand with our child, even just a little? What? Like I said, I'm swamped. I'm gearing up to find a new job. You get that, right? Or would you prefer I stayed unemployed forever? Imagine the father of your child, Douglas. If you're not happy, just follow orders. But we're barely getting by as it is. I'm covering all our food expenses with my savings, you know. Have you any idea how costly diapers are? You claim to be earning at the casino, yet you never contribute any money. Most of our living expenses were covered by my earnings. Initially, my mother-in-law handled the utility bills, but recently she began requesting $500 per month, forcing me to dip into my savings. Even our grocery bills were eating away at my dwindling funds, leaving me with little left. All I had to rely on was money I had saved from a part-time job during my student days. Enough. How dare you talk back to me? After all, you're the one who moved into my house. Richard, typically gentle, underwent a stark transformation when money or casino matters were involved. His outburst drew my mother-in-law into the room. What's all this now? Is your wife causing trouble again? She interjected. Yeah, she is. She's insisting I do housework, look after the child, and foot the living expenses. And on top of that, What audacity you have, Richard. You ought to be heading to work. Thanks, I'll handle it from here, Richard declared loudly as he stepped outside. Mother-in-law's eyes narrowed. You've got some nerve, burdening us with childcare and household chores while demanding money. It's disgraceful. It's not like that. I'm not making demands. It's just that without a little assistance, life is incredibly challenging. Perhaps you're not managing it well. Are you being careless with money? Mother-in-law seemed oblivious to the reality. She had no idea that her own son was unemployed and spending all his time at the casino. I had been instructed to stay silent, but I was at my wit's end. Do you know that Richard isn't bringing in a single cent? He's unemployed because he quit his job. What are you implying? Richard has always been outstanding. Yes, he may have stumbled with his college entrance exams, but he landed a job at a reputable company afterward. He quit that job after just a month. Now, he's always at the casino. I can't sustain us on my savings alone. That's absurd. Stop spouting nonsense. Mother-in-law vehemently rejected my claims. Her son, who had always been a star in sports and academics, was her pride and joy. The idea that he was now unemployed and squandering his time at the casino was too much for her to accept. Her face flushed with anger, mother-in-law stormed out of the room. When she returned with deliberate steps, I was taken aback to find her wielding a knife. What are you intending to do? Please put it down, I pleaded, edging away while cradling my son. Mother-in-law closed in slowly, the blade held menacingly aloft. With a chilling precision, she brought the tip of the knife to my throat. Enough of your insults toward my son. Having a wife like you is dragging Richard down. You're a lazy leech, surviving on a measly 70,000. Leave this house. Her harsh words sent shivers down my spine. Any sudden move could endanger my son. Seeing my silence and the fear etched on my face, mother-in-law seemed satisfied and lowered the knife. But you understand, there's no place for parasites like you. Just keep quiet and tend to your chores, she spat before retreating to her room. Relieved of the immediate threat, I crumpled to the floor, my son's sobs echoing in the tense air. I comforted him with gentle strokes on his back, but inside, a resolve solidified. We couldn't remain in this house any longer. The casual threat of a knife was unfathomable. She seemed devoid of humanity. I had been swayed by Richard's honeyed words until now. After each argument, I felt compelled to stand by him, believing he'd crumble without me. But I had reached my breaking point. Above all, my maternal instinct screamed to shield my sobbing son in my arms. This environment was no place to raise him. The decision was made. We would leave the next day. In the morning, my mother-in-law's stern voice pierced the air. Emily, please prepare for my husband's memorial service next week. All our relatives will be attending, so ensure everything is flawless, she commanded before hurrying off to a neighbor's house, leaving no room for my response. The following week marked my father-in-law's memorial service. Richard and my mother-in-law were discussing arrangements for a lavish feast and reminiscing about him. I was tasked with all the preparations, but I found myself mentally checked out. As soon as Richard and my mother-in-law stepped out, I hastily gathered my belongings and fled from their house. I didn't have much, just my clothes, my son's toys, and diapers. When I arrived at my parents' house, they were taken aback. However, as I poured out my heart to them, my mother was moved to tears and enveloped me in a tight embrace. My typically composed father was visibly enraged and instructed me to rest. Later that evening, the phone rang. It was undoubtedly Richard, wondering why I hadn't returned to prepare dinner. I disregard the call and opt to block his number. The following day, mother-in-law and Richard arrived together at my parents' house, banging on the door in the early hours. Though my parents attempt to deter them, I insist they be allowed inside. As I swing the door open, they launch into a tirade immediately. How could you vanish without a word? What kind of wife does that? Isn't it odd to disappear without a trace? Could you please lower your voices? You're disturbing the neighbors. I respond calmly, fighting the impulse to retort, who's the actual issue here? Upon witnessing my firm stance, they attempt to seize me, but my father intervenes. If you resort to violence, we'll call the authorities. Let's discuss this calmly inside first. With my parents by my side, I initiate the conversation with mother-in-law and Richard. Why did you vanish without a word? I was at my breaking point juggling childcare and my job, feeling utterly overwhelmed, yet you never offered a helping hand despite my pleas. Well, I was occupied as well. Occupied at the casino, as I've mentioned before. Our son doesn't frequent the casino. Stop spreading falsehoods, mother-in-law persisted, seemingly under the impression that Richard was still employed. It's understandable, considering what a dutiful son he's always been. She likely held onto that belief. Sometimes ignorance is a blessing. So, mother-in-law, where do you think Richard is currently employed? At a securities company. I've seen the job offer letter, remember? Well then, perhaps we should give them a call to confirm if Richard is still on their staff. That would settle the matter. Hold on a moment, Richard interjected, clearly flustered. What's the issue if I'm still employed there? It shouldn't be a problem. Well, that's I hesitated, noticing Richard's visible discomfort, then dialed the securities company's number on my phone, switching the call to speaker mode. I ensured everyone could hear as I inquired about Richard's employment status. That individual resigned several years ago, if memory serves me correctly. He was with us for just about a month. The voice from the phone left mother-in-law speechless. Richard, now looking down, clenched his fists. Did you really quit? Why? I pressed. Because it was frustrating. Everything was just grunt work and the boss would yell at me for the smallest mistakes. It was harassment, Richard finally admitted. Why haven't you kept us informed about your activities since then? I've been actively searching for a job. For how long have you been on the hunt? It doesn't appear to be yielding any results. Can you provide a count of how many companies you've applied to so I can verify? Well, the job market isn't exactly overflowing with great opportunities. I'm waiting for the right fit to come along. You seem quite confident in your abilities. By the way, you're currently working part-time, correct? What was your income last month? 700. 700. Didn't you claim to mother-in-law that Emily could barely make 700 and couldn't fend for herself, so you were the sole provider? Apparently, he missiled mother-in-law, suggesting I wasn't bringing in anything, but the reality was quite different. As a dental hygienist, my salary isn't extravagant, but I was making at least $2,000. Upon learning the truth, mother-in-law flushed crimson with anger, shooting daggers at Richard. Faced with the reality, Richard erupted in fury. Why must you do this? This is all you're doing, making me appear foolish. His pride evidently wounded, he couldn't bear the humiliation, slamming his fist on the table in frustration. You shouldn't divulge such matters in public. It's defamation, I uttered in disbelief. If you wish to pursue legal action, feel free, but I'll counter with a lawsuit for your knife threat as well. And let's not forget, lawsuits come with a hefty price tag. Do you have the funds? Richard retorted, clicking his tongue in frustration. It was likely he had squandered all his earnings at the casino. Meanwhile, mother-in-law remained in shock upon discovering the truth about Richard's unemployment. I've laid it all out for her. I'm the sole earner covering all our living expenses. When Richard and I wed, he promised to manage household duties and childcare in lieu of my job. But once married, he failed to fulfill any of those obligations. That contradicts what I'd been told. Mother-in-law seemed to blindly trust whatever Richard fed her, right? She became agitated when I requested assistance with chores and childcare. She even resorted to brandishing a knife, commanding me to keep quiet and attend to my housework. I could see my mother-in-law's complexion draining. Standing before my parents, being confronted for her misconduct, she appeared uneasy. Mother-in-law, you haven't contributed a dime to the household either. We've relied solely on my income all this time. I have no intention of continuing to toil for you, so I'm requesting a divorce. Divorce? Hold on a moment. Don't just drop such bombshells out of nowhere. Yes, indeed. I'll pitch in as well, so please reconsider and return, they implored. No, thank you, I firmly reiterated, their surprise evident in widened eyes. It was likely a shock for them, accustomed to my usual compliance even amidst shouting or persistent pleas, to hear my unequivocal refusal this time. I refuse to live with someone who resorts to wielding a knife to assert dominance. I'm exhausted from sharing a roof with Richard, who spends his days gambling at the casino. I intend to seek compensation for all the labor I've contributed thus far, as well as child support. That's going to be quite a challenge. I simply can't afford such payments, mother-in-law protested. Well then, cease gambling immediately and start making payments, I countered. But I can't possibly do that. I'm unemployed. Richard's admission left me flabbergasted by his sheer lack of foresight. You're unemployed because you're too selective about the jobs you're willing to take. Do you have any idea what it means to be willing to do whatever it takes? There aren't many companies out there willing to hire someone with no significant qualifications or work experience. Don't take society for granted. Many people are out there working tirelessly in challenging conditions to make ends meet. Yet individuals who quit their jobs on a whim because they're upset or don't enjoy their work, nobody's going to be eager to hire them, he lectures, expressing doubt about Richard's ability to find employment given his current approach. I'll have my lawyer handle the divorce proceedings. Please refrain from contacting me in any way from now on. What about us? How can you be so selfish? What will become of us? Mother-in-law's anger flared at my statement. I'm not sure. Perhaps you should find a way to support yourself, I retorted, deliberately adopting a puzzled expression in response to her heated words. Heartless. I won't tolerate being called that by you. Remember when you referred to me, your daughter-in-law, as a leech surviving on a meager $700 a month? It was you who held a knife to my throat and demanded my silence. And by the way, the lazy individual earning $700 a month is sitting right beside you. Aren't you going to ask him to leave? As I spoke, mother-in-law trembled with rage. Perhaps I had pushed too far. Suddenly, she lunged forward, grabbing my collar. Stop it. I warned you, I'll call the police if you lay a hand on her. My father intervened forcefully, trying to pull her away, but she was too agitated to be restrained. So, not content with threats of a knife, now resorting to physical violence. Barbaric, wouldn't you agree it's best not to compound your offenses? I challenged mother-in-law, met with a resentful glare. Disregarding her, I turned my attention to Richard. I held on to hope that you would change, but I'm relinquishing that now. My priority is to protect our son. I won't burden you any longer. I'll handle the finances, the household chores, and childcare. Please come back. You'll handle the money? Really? Even with careful budgeting, it exceeds $1,000 a month. Can you manage that? Richard's complexion paled at my words. He had never earned more than $1,000 since quitting his job. But I have mom's pension. So you're admitting you're relying on my pension now? Even my usually composed mother-in-law couldn't contain her frustration at Richard's absurd declaration. I don't have any other options. I'm unemployed. I've been doing some part-time work now, Richard replied defensively. Can't we attempt to resolve things? Mother-in-law interjected, hoping for reconciliation. Finally breaking his silence, my father addressed Richard sternly. Richard, you and your mother have taken undue advantage of our daughter. Had I known your true character, I would have vehemently opposed this marriage. I refuse to allow her back into your home. I'm cutting all ties with you. But I can't imagine life without Emily. Please grant me another chance, Richard pleaded desperately. Don't be ridiculous. Life without our daughter? Yet you're already relying on her. A man unwilling to strive for his own livelihood and to ensure his wife's well-being doesn't deserve our daughter. Leave at once. My father's voice carried an unusual edge, sending shivers down my spine. Richard knelt, head bowed, a pitiful sight devoid of the charm I once saw in him during our college days. Please reconsider, Emily. I'm begging you, Richard implored, his voice tinged with desperation. But my parents remained resolute. They had reached their limit. I refuse to be treated like a servant by the two of you any longer. Please refrain from involving me in anything moving forward, I asserted as we ushered them out of the house, swiftly locking the door behind them. For a while, they pounded on the door, shouted, but when a passing police officer intervened, they hastily fled. Afterward, I learned that Richard had been disowned by his mother and ejected from their home. He now resides in a dilapidated apartment, scraping by on welfare and sporadic part-time jobs. His volatile temper renders him unable to hold down any job for long, leading to a revolving door of positions at convenience stores, construction sites, and the like. Financial strain weighs heavily on him. In his efforts to meet his obligations for compensation and child support, Richard juggles multiple part-time jobs, leaving little room to pursue full-time employment. Rumors circulate that he still frequents the casino and may even be in debt. However, I pay little mind to such hearsay. News of Richard's downfall spreads rapidly among our former high school peers, prompting numerous sightings and updates. Reports of his eviction by his mother and their frequent altercations become common knowledge. His unemployment and abandonment by his wife become public gossip. Undoubtedly, his mother feels a deep sense of embarrassment after years of boasting about her son's achievements. She seldom ventures outside now. With the unwavering support of my parents in managing household duties and caring for my son, I continue to work. I now enjoy more quality time with my son, no longer needing to rely on daycare services. My parents' assistance has provided me with newfound freedom and stability. Taking care of him has made everything so much better. I only wish I had initiated the divorce sooner. Moving forward, I'm determined to cherish every moment I spend with my son and witness his growth up close.